Zayil Shams is a film about a girl and her deep connection to her professor who suddenly disappeared from her life. The film acts as her personal diary and a letter for him to see. She outlines her varied range of emotional experiences as a result of his appearance and impact on her life, and then his disappearance. Her feelings range from anger, sadness, longing, and confusion to growth, attachment, and understanding. The professor, who is also a documentary war filmmaker, taught the students a course and disseminated valuable knowledge and life lessons throughout 12 lectures. The film took on a non-linear format, showing non-chronological events throughout, through shots of the girl speaking about her feelings and perspective, then shots of the film she produced, and then texts of important quotes the professor said. The camera is used in a plethora of ways to evoke certain emotions in the audience. There are multiple black and white, low-quality, X-ray edited, close-up shots of the girl talking to the camera. These shots are the most vulnerable and uncomfortable. They are very close to the girl's face, showing all of her expressions and highlighting her thoughts and emotions. She speaks about the lesson the professor taught her and how they somehow felt targeted at her personally because they help her through the pain she's currently experiencing. She mentions how he alluded to his disappearance in his first lecture and how she believes that his disappearance is planned. Most of her perspectives and feelings tend to contradict one another and act as a reflective journal of her own delusional experience. Although she seems understanding of his disappearance, she's also confused and angry and tends to try to find the reason behind his actions and is unable to reach the conclusion she desires. Most of the mid-shots of the movie move along the story's narration and events. There is a series of similar shots of the girl while she's listening to the professor's lectures in her room, and ones in her day-to-day life. These shots show the audience a glance of how she lives her life within the past 3 years after his disappearance and while she's creating this film. There are other shots showing her on the last day she saw the professor, the day of the students' film screenings. She utilizes blurred shots to entice a feeling of nostalgia, somewhat like what she describes. The film presents some individuals in her life that impacted her way of thinking around this experience. For example, there is one shot of her friend claiming that she is in love with her professor, and she goes on to comment on her friend's naive perspective through the camcorder shots. Throughout the film, the audio added is mostly the recorded lecture of the professor, which she took from her friend. There are shots of texts on a black screen that highlight important lessons the professor taught the students with numbered lectures. These progressively become more complex as the film continues. The girl mentions that when she stopped listening to the lectures, she suddenly stumbled upon things that reminded her of the professor. One time, she walked past a shop he loved and asked the owner of the shop if he saw the professor recently. The film utilizes shots of allegorical scenes that tie to the story. For example, the film alludes to the painting The Last Supper, when the girl mentioned that the day she invited the class over to a dinner party to celebrate the final film, and the professor never showed up. The painting represents the prediction of Jesus' death, similar to her worry of something terrible happening to the professor, or perhaps the metaphoric death of his existence in her life. There are some shots of scenes from old movies that tie to what the girl is speaking about. One clip showed the vintage film scene of a woman dancing when the girl was talking about how she wanted to feel like a star when she showed the professor her first film project. She utilized repetition in the audio of the recorded lecture when the professor mentioned he rarely remembers people, and the students asked the professor if he would forget them, and he said, "Of course I will not forget you." The girl repeated this part of the audio, "Of course I will not forget you," to show how much she may have repeatedly listened to this part of the lecture, and to give herself some sort of delusional reassurance that the professor will not forget her. Some of the music utilized induced nostalgic feelings, like the clip of her friends playing music and singing while she was living in Turkey. She also utilizes Kurdish music in the film's beginning and end, since she mentions that it reminds her of the professor. This allows the audience to build a connection to the professor and understand his creative influence. The main plot twist of the film is when the girl found out from one of her friends that the professor is starting to lose his memory. Although it was tragic for her to find out, somehow this helped her forgive him for disappearing and not reaching out to her, and also stopped her from burning the film. Plants were a main motif in the film. The girl mentions how the professor learned the laws from plants and was inspired by them. He gave the students the book, The Secret Life of Plants, to read. Plants represents the girl in the film. She mentions that they feel, communicate, and express very similar to what the girl aims to achieve from creating this film. On the last day of the film screenings, the girl gifted her professor a tulasi tree, which symbolized her existence in the professor's life, and she underlines this through saying, "He sees it and remembers me." I loved how the film is raw, vulnerable, and unfiltered. This is shown through the shots taken with the camcorder and how the film is written. I love the non-linear approach that follows along with the non-linear feelings and thought patterns of the girl. The only thing I would improve about this film is adding context for some of the shots of old vintage movies, which somehow seem out of place sometimes. The movie ends with her holding the tree she gave the professor in the center of the stage, with a spotlight falling on her, representing her longing feelings towards him, and how she felt the most seen on that day, since she mentions that he looked at her with a look she will not forget when she gave him the tree. Thank you so much for listening.